Hey everybody, Chef Bates here, and welcome back to ServSafe. Yay! We're at Chapter 6. We're more than halfway through. It's time for the flow of food preparation. Prepping, washing, thawing, cooking, chilling, and even reheating leftovers. At every stage in this process, cross-contamination and time-temperature abuse can happen very easily, and you can prevent pathogens from spreading and growing by making good food choices, which, you should pretty much be doing anyway. We start off with the rules for preparing food, focusing in on how to safely prepare food prior to cooking or serving in order to prevent cross-contamination or time-temperature abuse. As we go through, I want you to pay careful attention to these two dangers. The ServSafe test focuses on how to prevent cross-contamination and time-temperature abuse very heavily. If you miss those topics, if you don't catch it, you'll have a really hard time passing the test. Because no matter what type of food you're prepping to cook, there are general preparation practices you have to follow. Most of these we've already covered, so here's a quick review. Obviously, you need to ensure your workstations, your cutting boards, and your utensils are clean and sanitized. Recall that cleaning removes dirt and debris. Sanitation reduces the pathogens that are present on a food surface. They're not the same thing. While you are prepping food, you should only remove as much food from the cooler as you can prep in a short period of time. We went over that last chapter. This keeps ingredients from sitting out for long periods of time. In the photo, the food handler has taken out way too much tuna salad. By the time that he makes that last sandwich, and of course it's a he, no woman would be that stupid, the tuna is going to have sat out far too long. As soon as possible, you must either cook or chill TCS foods you are prepping. In the case of these sandwiches, if they're not going to be immediately served, this food preparation person, food cook, he's going to have to cover them and return them to the refrigerator so they don't suffer time temperature abuse. All kinds of additives or food coloring agents might be used while prepping food. However, only some are approved for use by local health departments, the FDA, and state health boards. Only use additives that have been approved by your local regulatory authority. Never use more than is allowed by law, and never use additives to alter the appearance of food. For example, these 3 salmon fillets all came from the same fish farm, but each have been treated with different levels of coloring agent to make them more appealing. This is basically illegal. They're a fish criminal. Sulfites are sulfur-based food additives that preserve freshness. In general, when sulfites are added to commercially packaged foods and drinks, they are safe for most people, and they come without any health risks. But sulfites can be used for other things. Some shady restaurant owners out there will purchase leafy greens that have been treated with sulfites for side salads or a salad bar or whatever. The sulfites are going to keep the produce looking perky and fresh a lot longer than it normally would. This is dangerous. Don't buy produce that was treated with sulfites, even if it makes the lettuce look fresh. Never add sulfites to produce that's going to be eaten raw. About 5% of the population has a severe sulfite allergy, and you could give them a serious health condition. Heck, you could kill them. And you don't want that to show up in the newspaper. Your restaurant killed somebody with salad. Speaking of shady restaurant owners, food must be offered to customers in a way that does not mislead or misinform them. Customers must be able to judge the true appearance, color, and quality of food by looking at it. In addition to avoiding food additives or color additives to make old food look fresh, don't use colored plastic wrap to make meat look red when it's actually brown, or special lighting that's going to make older food products look fresh. If you look at the picture, this meat display has been fitted with pink lights that make the product they are offering appear fresher than it actually is. These people stink. Be honest. Don't sell trashy food with a nice wrapper that hides what the customer is buying. And one more thing for the shady restaurant owners out there. If you are going to advertise a product as one thing on your menu, you have to actually serve that thing. Food must be presented the way it was described. For example, if your menu offers fried perch, you cannot substitute catfish or whiting for the perch. That is stealing and evil. Whiting and catfish are delicious, but they're kind of cheap, and perch is very expensive. Food that has not been honestly presented must be thrown out. Hey, stuff happens. Cooks get sick. They might drip some bodily fluids into a salad without even noticing they're drippy until it's too late. They might throw up into a trash can. Seriously. That happened in my kitchen just last week. A bunch of kids decided they were going to have a hot pepper eating contest, and they ate whole habanero peppers, and then within about 10 minutes were throwing up. Now, we had to basically throw everything in the kitchen away. because them throwing up in the kitchen contaminated everything in the kitchen. Food that has become unsafe must be thrown out unless it can be safely reconditioned. All food, especially ready-to-eat food, must be thrown out if it is handled by staff who have been restricted or excluded from the operation due to illness. If it is contaminated by hands or bodily fluids, for example, from sneezing. If food has exceeded the time and temperature requirements designed to keep it safe, we might be able to save it through something called reconditioning. Reconditioning is the process of heating foods to their minimum internal cooking temperature and holding the food at that temperature for about 4 minutes. For example, a bowl of chili can be reconditioned by bringing it back to 165 degrees Fahrenheit and holding it there for 4 minutes. However, foods that have been in the temperature danger zone for more than 2 hours can't be reconditioned. If they spend more than 2 hours in the temperature danger zone, throw it out. To recap, this is our little refresher. To recap, when you're prepping meat, seafood, or poultry, you have to clean and sanitize work areas. You have to prep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separately or at a different time than ready-to-eat food. Remove only what can be prepped at one time. Don't overload your prep table with a bunch of product that's going to sit out at room temperature until you get to it. And return raw product to the cooler as quickly as possible. Those are the general rules. Now, there are specific foods that have special rules, and we're going to go over those next. And we'll start with produce. Produce is just another word for fruits and vegetables, and the most basic rule for all produce is avoid cross-contamination. Prep produce away from raw meat, poultry, and seafood. Obviously, what some young chefs don't realize is that they should also prep vegetables away from ready-to-eat food too. Cleaning and sanitizing the workspace and all utensils that are used before and after prepping produce is another important step to preventing cross-contamination. Fun fact, you've been washing your lettuce wrong. There are rules about how we wash all of our produce, but specifically lettuce and leafy greens. You should always wash produce thoroughly under running water. This is especially important before cutting it, cooking it, or combining it with other ingredients. The water should be a little bit warmer than the produce, and you should pay special attention to leafy greens like lettuce and spinach. If you look at the photo, you see that he's pulling apart the leaves. Always do that. Always remove the outer leaves. Pull the lettuce or spinach completely apart and rinse each leaf thoroughly. Dirt, sand, and grime can hide deep within the leaves, and that, of course, is disgusting. Now, if you want, there are certain chemicals that can be used to wash fruits and vegetables. Fit Organic is a good product for cleaning bacteria from the surface of produce. Also, produce can be treated by washing it in specially treated water containing ozone. This treatment helps control pathogens in both cases. But before you go out and buy a big old jug of Fit or an ozone generator, you have to check with your local regulatory authority. Your health inspector can tell you if chemically treated or ozone treated water is acceptable for cleaning produce where you work. Sometimes it's necessary to store produce in cold water or iced water, also known as an ice water slurry. When soaking or storing produce in standing water or an ice water slurry, do not mix different items or multiple batches of the same item. In other words, don't mix 2 different batches of romaine lettuce for Caesar salads in one giant sink full of ice water. And certainly don't mix all your vegetables into the sink and let them sit there for a long time, like this dummy in the picture is doing. All this person is doing is spreading any pathogens on those tomatoes to the scallions and the peppers, and it looks like she's got some curly endive in there, and what else? I can't tell. But all the vegetables in there have now traded pathogens. This is stupid. Don't do that. Now, you remember from Chapter 2 that cut melons, cut tomatoes, and cut leafy greens are TCS food. Make sure you hold them at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, which is basically the temperature of your fridge. Most restaurants hold all their fresh cut produce at this temperature. Every restaurant I've ever worked for, if you cut it, you stick it in the refrigerator. Now, if your operation primarily serves a high-risk population, don't serve raw seed sprouts. Raw seed sprouts are a dangerous food because of the way they're grown. Untreated eggs are considered TCS food. They're able to support the rapid growth of bacteria. You've got to handle pooled eggs carefully. Pooled eggs are eggs that are cracked open and combined in a container, as you see in the picture. Cook them promptly after you've mixed them, or store your pooled eggs at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, in other words, the fridge. And of course, only store pooled eggs in a clean and sanitized container. And for God's sakes, don't add more eggs to a batch of pulled eggs that are already in the fridge. Use up the old batch, clean and sanitize the container, then break open a bunch of new eggs. There are some areas where pulled eggs are not allowed. You'll have to check with your health inspector to see if you can even use pulled eggs in your establishment. It is possible to purchase eggs which have been treated to destroy bacteria. These eggs have been heat treated, they've been pasteurized, and are much safer than regular shell eggs. You should consider using pasteurized shell eggs or egg products when preparing egg dishes that need little or no cooking. Egg dishes requiring little or no cooking include things like Caesar salad dressing, or hollandaise sauce, or tiramisu, or ice cream, or chocolate mousse. Lots of good stuff are made with raw eggs. If you mainly serve high-risk populations, such as those in hospitals, or nursing homes, or daycare centers, only use pasteurized eggs or egg products when serving dishes that are raw or undercooked. Period. Shell eggs that are pooled must also be pasteurized. The only time you can use unpasteurized shell eggs is when the dish will be cooked all the way through, like an omelet or a cake. So if you see a question on ServSafe, and the question is something along the lines of, can you use unpasteurized shell eggs when making bread that will be served to a high-risk population? Now, you might think, of course not, we can't do unpasteurized eggs to a high-risk population, but in this case we could because the bread is going to be cooked up to 190 degrees. So the answer would be yes. Make sense? Remember Shigella SPP? Sure you do. Shigella is famously associated with bound salads like chicken salad, tuna, egg, pasta, or potato salad. All of these dishes have been involved in foodborne illness outbreaks. If you're making one of these products, prep them in small batches, so large amounts of food do not sit out at room temperature for long periods of time. These salads are not cooked after preparation. This means you don't have a chance to reduce pathogens that may have gotten into the salad. Therefore, you may have to take a few extra steps. Do this. Only use leftover TCS foods such as pasta, chicken, and potatoes if it was cooked, held, cooled, and stored correctly. Do not use a leftover TCS food that has been held for more than 7 days. And always check the use-by date of the stored TCS food before mixing into your salad, because if it doesn't have a date, if you don't know when it was supposed to be thrown out, don't put it in a new product. You're not going to... How do you know that's going to be safe? Don't be dumb. As an additional precaution, it is a good practice to use chilled tools and chilled ingredients when making bound salads, like tuna salad. Put everything in the cooler to get it below 41 degrees Fahrenheit before even beginning. For example, if you were making tuna salad with canned tuna, onions, and mayonnaise, you would put the entire unopened can of tuna into the fridge along with the jug of mayo, the onions, and even the bowl you're planning on mixing it in. This is just smart. As far as ServSafe is concerned, ice is food. We treat ice like a food and work hard to avoid biological, chemical, and physical contamination. Only make ice from water that is safe to drink, preferably filtered. That kind of water is called potable water. Never use ice as an ingredient if it was used to keep food cold. For example, if ice is used to cool food on a salad bar, it can't then be put into someone's drink. If ice was used to keep cans of soda cold, it can't be used in drinks either. That's gross. Just think about those gross fingers that were on those cans, and then they shoved them down into the ice, and now their gross finger grease is all over the ice cubes, and now those ice cubes are in your drink, and their finger grease is in your mouth. It's like they put their finger in your mouth. That's nasty. Use clean and sanitized containers to transfer ice from an ice machine to other containers. Never hold or carry ice in containers that have held raw meat, seafood, poultry, or chemicals. Obviously, ice needs to have its own designated carrying container. This blue one in the picture is pretty standard in most restaurants. It's made by Safety. You see that bucket everywhere. Speaking of buckets you see everywhere, make sure you use a clean and sanitized ice scoop to transfer ice from an ice machine to a customer's glass. Now, obviously, you're never going to touch ice with your bare hands. You already know how I feel about that. But you're not going to use a glass to scoop the ice either, because the glass, it could very easily chip off a tiny piece of glass into somebody's drink. And, as bad as it might be to swallow that tiny piece of glass, just imagine what that little piece of glass is going to do to you the next day when it comes out. Bad. Don't do that. Don't use glass to scoop ice. A lot of young chefs forget about fried foods when they're worried about cross-contamination and time-temperature abuse. They sort of forget about it. The batter that you use to deep fry items is almost always made with eggs or milk and therefore runs the risk of time-temperature abuse and cross-contamination. So do this. When you make a batch of batter, store what you don't need at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower in a covered container. In other words, stick it in the fridge. Remember that once raw meat has gotten into your batter, the countdown begins. That batter has to not only be kept out of the temperature danger zone, but it has to be discarded after 6 hours. When you are restocking batter, never mix or top off an old batch of batter with a bunch of new batter. Keep the two separate. Make sure you have a plan and you throw out old batter or breading at specific times during the day, like every 6 hours or at the end of a shift. And always remember while you're cooking that the coating of battered and breaded food is an insulator and it can prevent food from being thoroughly cooked. It can look golden brown and delicious on the outside and be completely raw on the inside. It is so important that fry cooks are trained to cook items properly. And speaking of cooking things properly, you really have to understand how a fryer works to prevent serving undercooked fried items to your guests. When cold food is dropped into a deep fryer, the temperature of the oil drops, and it takes a period of time to recover, known very creatively as recovery time. It's a best practice to allow the oil in the deep fryer to fully recover back up to the right cooking temperature, which is almost always 350 to 400 degrees, before dropping the next batch. It's a best practice to avoid overloading fry baskets. You want all your items to cook properly. And by the way, everybody who's frying should have a bimetallic stem thermometer, and they should be calibrating it and ensuring the food is cooked at the right temperature and that the fried foods have reached their minimum internal cooking temperature to be safe. There are some types of food which you can't cook unless you get special permission. That special permission is called a variance. A variance is a document that's issued by the health inspector that allows a requirement to be waived or changed or basically ignored. When you're applying for a variance, your health inspector is going to require you to submit a HACCP plan. And HACCP is a Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point plan. The plan must account for any food safety risks that are related to the way you plan to prep the food item. There are 8 types of food which might require a variance. And let's go through them one at a time. Smoking food as a way to preserve it. We're not trying to smoke food just to make it taste better. We're smoking food so that it can sit out at room temperature, like smoked bacon. We made smoked bacon last year, and it was delicious. If you decide you want to start serving charcuterie that you make in your own restaurant, in other words, you want to cure food, you want to make dried sausage or cheese, you're definitely going to need a variance. If you plan on using food additives or adding components like vinegar to preserve or alter food so that it no longer needs time and temperature control for safety, for example, you want to serve a shrimp and scallop ceviche, like the one in this picture, you're going to need a variance to serve this. It's an acid-cooked raw seafood. Lots of nicer restaurants offer freshly squeezed juice. It's one of the beverage options. You don't need a variance to serve fresh juice. You do, however, need a variance if your operation plans to squeeze the fresh juice, label, and package it on site for sale at a later time. The only way you'll get a variance to sell fresh juice packaged for later sale is if the juice is either pasteurized on site in accordance with a HACCP plan, or it has a warning label that complies with local regulations. You'll also need a variance if your restaurant does any of these. If a hunter brings a deer he shot to a restaurant, the chef dresses the carcass, and the hunter takes the meat home for later use, you're custom processing animals for personal use. That's the official title. You need special permission for that. Wild game is closely linked to many parasites and worms that can infect the person eating the meat and which can contaminate your facility. If your restaurant cooks sous vide food that you package in-house using any of the vacuum packing methods like ROP, MAP, or sous vide, you have to get a variance. Vacuum-packed food is closely linked to botulism outbreaks. If your restaurant wants to serve microgreens or sprouts that you grow yourself, you have to get a variance. Sprouting seeds or beans is closely linked to multiple foodborne illnesses, not just one. And, of course, if you have a live shellfish tank, if you have a big tank with lobsters in it, you have to get a variance. The water in a shellfish tank needs special maintenance to avoid giving all of your customers norovirus or hepatitis A, both of which are bad. Since in the world of commercial cooking, almost all product comes to us frozen, before we can cook the food, we have to thaw it. When frozen food is thawed, it is exposed to the temperature danger zone. It's possible for pathogens in thawing foods to grow because most bacterial pathogens survive the freezer. To reduce this growth, never thaw food at room temperature. This is dumb. Don't thaw food on your kitchen counter. Your kitchen counter is for sitting on and getting yelled at by your parents, or your mom, or your wife. Don't thaw food on your kitchen counter, ever. Instead, use one of these 4 options to thaw food prior to cooking or serving. Well, the most basic way is to thaw food in the refrigerator, keeping its temperature at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower the whole time. This requires advanced planning because large items like this turkey could take several days or even a whole week to thaw completely in the refrigerator. The most popular way to thaw food in restaurants is by using running water. It's fast. It's faster than a microwave. It's safe, and for the most part, it thaws food without damaging it. When thawing food under running water, the flow of the water must be strong enough to wash loose food bits into the drain. Always use a clean and sanitized food prep sink when thawing food this way. Don't put a bunch of raw chicken in a dirty sink and then thaw it. Ugh. While you're doing it, never let the temperature of the food get above 41 degrees Fahrenheit for longer than 4 hours. This includes the time it takes to thaw the food, plus the time it takes to prep or cool it. I almost forgot the most important part of thawing food under running water, and that's that the water has to be 70 degrees or cooler. Never use warm and certainly not hot water when thawing food. But sometimes you got something small, and thawing it under running water just doesn't do the trick. In this case, pop it in the microwave at 50% power and make sure you follow a couple simple rules. Only thaw food in a microwave oven if it's going to be cooked immediately after thawing, and only thaw raw food in the microwave if you will finish the cooking on conventional cooking equipment like an oven or a grill or a deep fryer. In other words, don't thaw a raw chicken breast in the microwave and then cook it in the microwave. It won't be safe, and besides, don't cook raw foods in the microwave. That's terrible and lazy and awful and gross and nasty. Ugh. There are some foods that you can thaw as part of the cooking process. For example, frozen hamburger patties can go straight from the freezer onto a grill without first being thawed. Some packaged frozen chicken can go straight into a deep fryer. These items cook quickly enough from the frozen state to pass through the temperature danger zone without harm. However, you should always verify the final internal cooking temperature with a thermometer. Some frozen food may also be slacked before cooking. Slacking is the gradual thawing of frozen food to prep it for deep frying. This allows even heating during cooking. For example, you might slack frozen breaded chicken breasts by having them warm from the freezer temperature of negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit up to about 25 or 35 degrees in the refrigerator. If your health inspector says that slacking is okay, make sure you follow these 2 rules. Slack food just before you cook it, and of course, don't let your frozen food get warmer than 41 degrees Fahrenheit. That would be stupid. Speaking of gradually thawing frozen food prior to cooking, let's talk frozen fish. Frozen fish fillets are very frequently supplied in reduced oxygen packaging, ROP packaging, like this tilapia fillet. Because of concerns about the potential for botulism, frozen fish in ROP packaging has special handling practices. And this is basically what you need to do. This tilapia fillet, the one in the picture, it needs to stay frozen solid until ready to use inside the packaging. We can thaw it in one of 2 ways. We can either take it out of the packaging, put it on a tray, and stick it in the refrigerator, or we could thaw it in the packaging under cool running water until it's thawed, and then take it out of the packaging. The bottom line is, at no point do we want the thawed fish to stay in the packaging for a long period of time. There's no oxygen in there, and botulism loves a zero oxygen environment. And that is as good a place to stop as any. Prepping and thawing is all done. Now all we have to cover is cooking, cooling, and reheating. Well, we'll come back shortly, and we'll cover the rest of what you need to know from Chapter 6. Till then, happy cooking.